Before we begin, if this channel delivers the kind of deep, evidence-based history you care about, subscribe now and share this episode with someone who studies the past seriously. It keeps this archive alive and independent. Now let's get into it. What if I told you that the greatest empires in history were not built first on armies or gold, but on soil management decisions that worked for centuries without fertilizers, machines, or fossil fuels? Ancient agriculture was not primitive guesswork. It was systems thinking under pressure. When populations rose, land could not expand forever. Survival demanded methods that protected soil fertility across generations. Crop rotation was the backbone of that solution. And today, we're going to unpack how ancient societies used it deliberately, why it worked, and how those same principles still apply if you're thinking about sustainability, resilience, or even long-term survival planning. Why ancient crop rotation was about survival, not optimization. Ancient farmers did not rotate crops for higher yields in the modern sense. They rotated to avoid collapse. Continuous monocropping stripped nitrogen, hardened soils, and invited pests. Long before soil chemistry was understood scientifically, farmers observed that certain plants restored fields while others exhausted them. In regions tied to centralized power like the Roman Empire, failed harvests meant unrest, tax shortfalls, and military weakness. Rotation became a strategic necessity, enforced by tradition and sometimes law, not an agricultural experiment. The key insight was biological diversity over time. Instead of growing the same crop every season, ancient systems alternated cereals with legumes, root crops, or fallow periods. This slowed nutrient depletion and disrupted pest cycles. The result was stability, not abundance spikes followed by famine. So how did Mesopotamian fields manage to stay productive despite, those really harsh conditions? In ancient Mesopotamia, farmers actually worked marginal soils under extreme salinity stress. Wheat and barley were the main crops early on, but over time, barley gradually replaced wheat because it just tolerated salt buildup a bit better. What really kept these systems going for centuries was the rotation with fallow land and grazing. Fields were rested on purpose, allowing salts to leach out and organic matter to rebuild. Farmers also rotated irrigated fields with dry farming zones, which prevented, permanent soil damage. This wasn't just by chance. Cuneiform records actually show state oversight of planting schedules. The lesson here is that rotation was adapted to environmental limits. For modern application, this means you should rotate crops based on what stresses your soil most, not simply what sells best. If nitrogen loss is your main problem, legumes really matter. If compaction is the issue, then deep-rooted plants are the solution. Now let's look at how Roman rotation systems supported those massive urban populations. Roman agriculture relied on a 2- and 3-field rotation system right across Europe and North Africa. One field would carry grain, another would have legumes or forage, and the third would rest. Legumes like beans and lentils quietly replenished nitrogen while also feeding people and livestock. Manure from grazing animals was returned to the soil, closing the nutrient loop. This system scaled because it was simple and enforceable. Large estates followed the same logic as small farms. For modern survivalists, the takeaway is integration. Crops, animals, and soil must function as one system. Growing beans after grains is not optional if you want land that feeds you 10 years from now instead of 3. How Chinese dynasties refined rotation into precision agriculture. In Han era, China, farmers combined crop rotation with green manures and multi-season planting. Rice paddies alternated with legumes or rested under aquatic plants that fixed nitrogen naturally. Written agricultural manuals from the Han period show an advanced understanding of timing and soil recovery. What made this system endure was documentation and transmission. Knowledge was standardized and passed down, not rediscovered every generation. For modern application, write down what works on your land. Track what follows what. Rotation only succeeds long-term, when memory outlasts the individual farmer. So how did Andean civilizations manage to farm vertically without, exhausting their soil? In the Andes, Inca farmers rotated crops across altitude zones, rather than just by seasons. Potatoes, quinoa and maize each found their place at different elevations and in different types of soil. Fields were actually left to rest for years, not just months, and all of this was organized through communal labor, which really helped ensure food security. This remarkable system fed millions, even though they didn't have draft animals or iron tools, and it supported the Inca Empire across some of the most extreme terrain on Earth. The practical lesson here, honestly, is patience. Ancient systems were built on the idea of accepting slower returns if it meant greater longevity. Leaving land fallow, well, that's not wasted time at all. It's actually an investment. And it's something ancient empires understood far better than I think modern industrial agriculture often does. So, what does ancient crop rotation really teach us about resilience today? Well, across so many cultures, the same pattern appears. Rotate crops to restore nutrients, break up pest cycles, embrace a bit of short-term restraint to avoid long-term collapse. These weren't just theories, by the way. They were survival-tested systems refined through real, sometimes harsh, consequences. If you are managing land today, even at a small scale, you should really apply this logic directly. Alternate heavy feeders like grains with nitrogen fixers such as beans. Rotate root crops to break up soil compaction. Schedule fallow periods intentionally, not just by accident. And, keep animals in the system if possible, even if that just means composting manure rather than grazing. Ancient farmers, well, they didn't chase yield records, they chased continuity. That mindset actually fed cities, armies, and whole civilizations for centuries without destroying the land beneath them. Ancient agriculture was not backward, not at all. It was conservative in the truest sense of the word, conserving soil, knowledge, and future harvests. If you're serious about history or, frankly, long-term survival, crop rotation is not just a nostalgic concept. It's really one of the most battle-tested strategies humanity has ever developed. If this kind of deep historical analysis matters to you, do consider subscribing to the Global War Archive, share this episode with a fellow researcher or survival-minded thinker, and, help keep this knowledge moving forward.